responsibility of this president and this administration to be good stewards of taxpayer dollars.
The president is declaring himself king, taking the power of the purse into his own hands.
It's in the best interest to pause and see where this money is wasted. Look, 77 million Americans elected President Trump to be a game changer.
People should think about the mom who doesn't know if she can get her kid to childcare today. Or they should think about the teenager in a cancer study, hoping beyond hope that that's going to save his life.
Hello, I'm Ed O'Keefe in Washington. Tonight on America Decides, a new edict from the White House. President Trump seeking to freeze trillions of dollars in federal aid. And just in, a federal judge in Washington has issued what they call an administrative stay in that funding fight, pausing the funding freeze until at least Monday, February 3rd at 5 p.m. to allow for further litigation. The president had aimed to halt funding for foreign aid, funding for non-governmental organizations, diversity, equity, and inclusion, or, quote, woke gender ideology programs, and funding related to the so-called Green New Deal, which, of course, was never officially legislation ever signed into law. The funding freeze is among the first questions asked of the new White House press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, holding her first press briefing this afternoon.
It is the responsibility of this president and this administration to be good stewards of taxpayer dollars. The American people gave President Trump an overwhelming mandate on November 5th, and he's just trying to ensure that the tax money going out the door in this very bankrupt city actually aligns with the will and the priorities of the American people.
Immigration crackdown. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem takes the helm today. It comes just hours after she joins an immigration raid in New York City. The operation, which agency officials say targeted murderers, kidnappers, and other criminals. Let's start tonight with Olivia Rinaldi and Major Garrett. Major, of course, is our chief Washington correspondent who spent most of today alongside the Homeland Security Secretary in a city, we should point out, New York, that has been cooperating with federal officials. Let's take a listen to part of Major's conversation with the Homeland Security Secretary.
Some might say, isn't New York a sanctuary city? But you said the mayor's been cooperative?
The mayor's been fantastic. In fact, I talked to him on the phone probably 4 or 5 times last night. How on one of these individuals was so dangerous that we needed the backup of the NYPD to be there in case things went south.
So, Major, what did you learn by seeing these operations? And did you really have to wear a bulletproof vest?
So tactical gear was provided to everyone, and they were pretty insistent. Matter of fact, it was not really negotiable. We had to wear it. So, to make one very important distinction, the New York City Police Department cooperated with one of the 3 immigration actions that we witnessed this morning, all pre-dawn. It was one involving someone who had a criminal warrant and had a very lengthy set of charges. New York City Police policy, through the mayor, Eric Adams, is when there is a criminal warrant, they can and will assist, if requested, federal immigration officials, which is exactly what happened. The 2 other immigration actions we witnessed did not involve New York City Police because there were no warrants involved, and that is a delineation that's important to the city of New York. It's important to other cities with so-called sanctuary city status, as New York has. So that is the difference. And the mayor did talk to Kristi Noem, the Homeland Security Secretary, 4 times on Sunday because the Homeland Security Secretary said, look, we would like New York City PD to be there as backup in case this thing gets out of hand. Trust me, based on my observation, Ed, there were about 60 or so personnel involved in this first action against this criminal illegal immigrant. There was a massive presence of tactically geared Homeland Security investigation personnel, overwhelming show of force. They broke into the apartment. They arrested 4. 3 children were also taken into custody, not because of their immigration status, but just to find out if they could receive some kind of care while the 4 adults were being detained and the 1 criminal immigrant sought was being set on a path to eventual deportation. So, massive show of force throughout, and all of the episodes that we observed personally ended without incident or hassle.
That does seem like a lot for one guy.
It was a lot.
Is this the plan for every single arrest they're going to try to make across the country, or are they just doing this because cameras also happen to be rolling?
Look, clearly there was interest in having cameras present. There's no doubt about that. There were other parts of this very large team, I would say 90 or so federal officials, which included ICE, HSI, which is Homeland Security Investigations, DEA, ATF, and U.S. Marshals, all involved. They were also fanning across the city. Local media was tipped off to those, which indicates a high interest in having cameras present. Some call that performative law enforcement. Others call it a way of spreading the message, creating deterrence, and a sense that this is going to be different than the Biden administration, and the new policies are going to be imposed and enforced aggressively. And clearly that's one of the messages they want to send. I'm not a law enforcement expert. I'm not going to tell you it was overkill. I'm just telling you, based on my observation, there was a tremendous show of force, and it felt and it looked larger than required. But again, those are tactical judgments I defer to the experts on.
And of course, let's remember, this is a president who chose cabinet secretaries based on how telegenic they look, whether they can play the part in public. And Noem clearly today, ball cap on, tactical gear, tweeting about it, talking to you, probably fulfilling the wishes and expectations of the president who wanted to see her do this. Hang with us for a second, Major, because this other issue here today, freezing grants and loans, is sweeping and has swept the country today with real confusion. Olivia, who helps cover the White House with us, do we have any sense, before this judge's order that just came in, of who this could have potentially affected?
Well, that was the big question today, right? We heard about this memo, but who actually was impacted? And the confusion not only trickled down from the federal government, but to state governments across the country. People calling their constituents in Congress, expressing mass concern about what they would have access to, what grants, loans, federal assistance. Caroline Leavitt, in the press briefing today, said that certain benefits like Social Security, Medicaid, other grants and loans would not be impacted. But what we saw was that Medicaid websites across the country were down. Right. They said this is not related. They said, could have been just a coincidence. But in any case, it caused a lot of confusion, panic, worry among people. We're already starting to see some action from Democratic AGs, but also nonprofit coalitions across the country asking what is going on, when this pause will be lifted, when they could have access to more of this federal funding.
I want you to listen to what Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer had to say today about the real-world effects of this memo. Take a listen.
It's a dagger at the heart of the average American family in red states, in blue states, in cities, in suburbs, in rural areas. It is just outrageous.
So how's the White House responding to all this confusion?
Well, a lot of questions in the press briefing today about this. Caroline Leavitt said she would provide a list of the organizations that are impacted. What they're trying to stress from the White House is that this memo is not to impact those federal funds and assistance that people need that help them get by in their daily life, on health care to food. But what this does is impact those, quote, pet projects that Trump wants to make sure are in line with his priorities and not the priorities of people who are perhaps in the federal government, career service officials. They're trying to make that distinction, going on cable channels and making this clear, but still a lot of confusion. Now we have this judge's order that is pausing this until next Monday so people can file litigation against this move from Trump. I suspect this is just one of many things we're going to be tracking in the coming weeks that could impact the Americans.
Major, this is something that the president, then the candidate, campaigned on. In fact, we have a clip that sort of speaks to that. Take a listen.
I will do everything I can to challenge the Impoundment Control Act in court and, if necessary, get Congress to overturn it. To prepare for this eventuality, on day one, I will order every federal agency to begin identifying large chunks of their budgets that can be saved through efficiencies and waste reduction using impoundment.
Impoundment. He was talking about it in June 2023. Quickly,
yes.
Remind the audience, what is this and what is it a bigger fight over?
So this has been litigated many times. Goes back to Richard Nixon. President saying, Congress appropriated money, but I don't want to spend it, and I'm going to hold it back for things I want to spend it on. Courts have said presidents can't do that. The Constitution is clear on this. And as you well know from your experience covering the federal government, Ed, once contracts are sent and sealed by the federal government, they cannot be rescinded.
Right.
But those things that haven't yet been contracted and are still in the process of being contracted can be reevaluated. On the reevaluation side, this administration is probably legally safe. On the contracting side, it is not.
This is a legal fight the White House wants, and it has begun. And we will, of course, cover it. Olivia Rinaldi, thank you. Major Garrett, more of your reporting and your time with Kristi Noem on the CBS Evening News and CBS Mornings tomorrow. We appreciate it. Thank you both. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says President Trump has invited him to Washington for a meeting at the White House next month. This would make him the first foreign leader to visit the White House under the second Trump administration. The planned meeting on February 4th would be just one day after negotiations begin on implementing the second phase of the ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas. U.S. Special Envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, is expected to meet with Prime Minister Netanyahu in Israel tomorrow. President Trump's funding freeze is sparking panic among international aid groups. Next, the president of Refugees International joins us with more on the decision's impact. You're watching America Decides. Welcome back. Even as a federal judge temporarily pauses President Trump's order to freeze federal funding assistance, the State Department's already taken sweeping measures to halt foreign aid. The directive says that the State Department and U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID, must stop all spending while the new administration carries out a review. The notable exceptions were emergency food programs as well as aid for Egypt and Israel. Jeremy Kanainik, who is the president of Refugees International, is here now. He formerly served as an official at USAID, which I know, by the way, has taken quite a hit in the last few days as we hear that current officials are being escorted out of the building or reassigned. They're taking down any visual demonstration of the work that's been done. It's a really distressing time for a lot of people in this space.
It's an incredibly distressing time. It's a frightening time. And many organizations are very fearful to speak out and talk about what's going on. I'm able to do so because our organization, Refugees International, does not take federal funding. Otherwise, we would be in a similar spot.
And which global U.S. programs are you most concerned about being disrupted at this point?
So a few things that I would point to are the programs that right now, in real time, are ways that America is saving lives around the world, and that is our global health programs and our humanitarian programs. So every day at U.S.-funded HIV clinics around the world, more than 200,000 people go and they pick up their antiretrovirals to keep their HIV infections suppressed. That has stopped. People are turning up to those clinics. They cannot get their drugs. Humanitarian programs are pulling out of refugee camps, pulling out of the famine zones in Sudan. That will very quickly begin to kill people.
I mean, it's within a president's right to review everything, but when you hear that real-world effect, that there are people showing up looking for the help that's been there and realizing it's not, you got to wonder what kind of an effect that has. And you've been quoted calling this action to limit foreign aid a, quote, win for China. Why is it a win for China?
So foreign aid is one of the principal ways that America shows up in the world and that we show American values to the world. And so when we are providing HIV drugs, when we are saving lives in refugee crises, we are showing up in the world in a way that shows an American spirit of generosity. This shows the opposite. And it also, in addition to just making us look cruel and callous, it makes us look deeply unreliable. 5 million people in South Africa depend on this funding for their ARV treatment. Where are they going to go for that? So China can now go to a lot of these countries, and I'm sure that this is already happening in Chinese embassies around the world, and say, look, who is the more reliable partner?
There is also acute concern for Afghans who helped U.S. forces in that country during the war. Are there other groups of refugees around the world that are potentially affected by this freeze in funding?
Yes. All refugee resettlement has been halted, including even services to support new arrivals who have come in the last few weeks prior to President Trump taking office. So that means, whether it's Afghans or people from South Sudan or wherever, if they have come here in the last few weeks, they now have no support. The services that would normally welcome them are mandated to be halted. It's also separating families. We've heard stories of families, one family, a woman who was a South Sudanese refugee. There was an administrative issue with some of her paperwork when her family traveled in early January. She had to stay behind. She's now stranded in a refugee camp with no family around to protect her while her family is here heartsick.
And they got to hope that the kindness of strangers then makes up the void if they're here and they're not getting that program relief that they were expecting.
And, there will be community support. A lot of the church groups and faith-based organizations that welcome them here will be doing what they can, but they'll be doing that without access to the federal funding that normally supports those programs.
Have you had any interaction with a Trump administration official about the real-world effects that this is having?
You know, we have been talking to a lot of members of Congress. There are very few people at home in the administration right now to even talk to.
Right, which is a real problem. Jeremy Konyndyk, thank you for coming in with Refugees International. We're going to talk to you again about this because obviously it's a big issue, not just here at home, but around the world. And I know you guys are closely tracking the potential fallout, so we appreciate it.
My pleasure.
A small new Chinese startup stuns the artificial intelligence industry. The startling new advances from the app DeepSeek, what it means for America's AI ambitions. Stay with us. You're watching America Decides. The artificial intelligence arms race has a new competitor out of China. A new AI app made by Chinese tech startup DeepSeek appears to be better and significantly cheaper than its American counterparts. Right now, it sits at the top of the charts on Apple's App Store, despite close ties to the Chinese Communist Party and vast collection of users' personal data. President Trump has made AI infrastructure a pillar of his second administration, and in the wake of DeepSeek's release, vowed to, quote, unleash our tech companies.
The release of DeepSeek AI from a Chinese company should be a wake-up call for our industries that we need to be laser-focused on competing to win.
Kristi Noem joins us now. She's a tech reporter for Politico. As you said, you've been deeply seeking answers to everything DeepSeek in recent days, so hopefully you have some for us. Why is this creating such a frenzy? And what is it that we should know about it?
Yeah, DeepSeek really took the world really by storm. Washington, right, AI companies, Wall Street, when it released this new model, R1, and it appears to have done it cheaper and perform better than American AI models.
Yeah.
So specifically, the comparison was made to OpenAI's latest and greatest O1 model, and across a host of performance benchmarks, DeepSeek's R1 appears to, match or outperform in many cases.
And do it cheaper, faster.
And do it cheaper, faster. We don't know exactly how much this latest model costs to train, but DeepSeek has claimed that the base model that it used to train this on, it only took $5.6 million to do that final test run.
That's nothing to most tech companies.
Well, that's nothing compared to the hundreds of $billions that American AI companies are spending. Now, that's not the full picture. A lot of analysts warn that. But either way, even if it's costs 100 times that much, actually, that would still be a bargain, right, compared to what American AI companies are spending.
Is the sudden emergence of this got anything to do with what President Trump was announcing last week? Because the timing seems awfully suspicious.
Well, the timing, a lot of people note that this might be a message that China is sending to the Trump administration. They released this model to the public during its first week. And the message here would be, a lot of this is happening in the context of what the U.S. is doing to make sure that its AI industry stays ahead and China's stays behind. And for the past 4 years, this started under President Trump, but the Biden administration has really ramped this up. They've instituted a series of export controls to withhold American tech from the Chinese AI industry. But DeepSeek happened in spite of that. And so the message here that some have been saying this might be China sending to President Trump is, hey, these export controls aren't working, so maybe stop.
Yeah.
Right? American companies, a lot of them would like that because this also hurts their bottom lines, those export controls.
So the president said that this should be a wake-up call for the American tech sector. Do we expect a ramp-up of federal support for them to sort of pump that sector now with more money to say, go, figure this out?
Well, it's funny because it seems like as some of the dust is settling from this development, a lot of people are interpreting this in whatever way, reflects their kind of existing, what they've been calling for the administration to do. So a lot of AI developers already have been asking the Trump administration, to extend more federal support, build all these data centers, energy facilities that are needed to make sure, this AI boom stays in America. And I'm sure a lot of them already have, taken to acts and talked about this being AI Sputnik moment.
Yeah.
And asked for President Trump to double down, right, and extend them even more support, right? This kind of raises the odds for us if China has managed to, do this in spite of what, our previous policies. Others, right, are saying that that would be an inaccurate read of the situation, and that actually those export controls take a while to take effect. And so. And Congress is also reevaluating, right, what this means for them, right?
Yeah.
Because do we need AI rules now, right? Do we actually need to loosen them so that, these companies can, we're not putting bounds on our own companies, that sort of thing. It seems like everyone is doubling down around what they previously thought.
And as you know, you cover one of the fastest moving sectors in the world, the tech sector, and one of the slowest, Congress and federal policymakers.
Exactly.
And how they react to all this is what's going to really define potentially the rest of this century.
Exactly.
Kristi Noem, good to see you. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
And for being so informative and enthusiastic about it, too. Appreciate it. Hashing out President Donald Trump's legislative agenda as congressional Republicans meet for a second day in Florida. Our reporter panel breaks down the agenda next on America Decides. Tonight, those affected by President Trump's federal funding freeze have a little longer to clear up confusion over the order. A federal judge has temporarily halted it. Earlier today, top Senate Democrat Chuck Schumer sharply criticized the action.
This decision is lawless, it's destructive, it's dangerous, it's cruel, it's illegal, and it's unconstitutional. Donald Trump has done a lot of bad things in the last week, but nothing's worse than this.
Let's bring in two reporters who know a little bit about all this to discuss it a little more. Nancy Cook, a senior national political correspondent for Bloomberg News, and Julie Grace Brufke is a senior political correspondent for the Daily Beast, joining us from Doral, Florida, where House Republicans are meeting behind occasionally opened but mostly closed doors about the future as they prepare for some big legislation later this year. Earlier today at the White House, the new press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, defended this federal aid freeze. Let's take a listen to what she had to say.
I think this is a very responsible measure. Again, the past 4 years, we've seen the Biden administration spend money like drunken sailors. It's a big reason we've had an inflation crisis in this country, and it's incumbent upon this administration to make sure, again, that every penny is being accounted for honestly.
I get the drunken sailor spending bit, but Julie Grace, you're there with all of them in Florida. Is there sufficient support for what they pulled today among congressional Republicans?
Well, I've spoken to a number of lawmakers today, and there still seems to be some confusion to the scope of what it's going to affect. And there's definitely some concerns among moderates about what it would do to programs like Medicaid, rural school programs, senior programs. So there are a lot of lawmakers that kind of want answers, but also feel like there need to be spending cuts. So while many of them are optimistic, there are still a lot of questions that they would like answered at this point.
I imagine they could sit there and go, these ads write themselves. If you're withholding funding for Meals on Wheels or for school lunch programs or things like that, I mean, there's got to be a real scare among some of them. Does that have the potential to force the president, the White House, to pull back and change course?
Well, I think that they just didn't have a ton of answers about all of the programs affected. And we saw that in the first White House briefing today by Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt. You know, she kept emphasizing that benefits that go directly to people like Medicare and Social Security aren't affected. But there's a ton of benefits that do flow through states like Medicaid or through nonprofits that then flow to people like Meals on Wheels. And there's just a real lack of clarity about sort of how the sweep of this federal funding freeze and you know, what it actually looks like.
Julie Grace, you are, as we said, in Doral. They're holding these meetings at Trump Doral, which has a handful of golf courses and a club or two, and certainly enough conference space for all of the House Republicans. What has been on their agenda? What's the purpose of these meetings, and what are we expecting them to come back to Washington having discussed?
No, so today they met with J.D. Vance, who kind of called for all of them to unify together, and particularly with this reconciliation bill coming up. So they're kind of trying to hash out what they could get in there as they look to extend the Trump tax cuts, roll back regulations on energy, deal with border legislation, all of this one bill that they're kind of looking to put together here. That being said, there's some moderates that are kind of temping down expectations, saying they don't want to overpromise and underdeliver, but they're hoping to be able to get some things done. But there are still some disagreements with the Freedom Caucus on things like how to handle the debt ceiling and some other critical things that they need to tackle there as part of their agenda.
One of those critical things is so-called state and local taxes, or SALT, as it's known to those of us from the Northeast. And there's been a lot of focus on that, Nancy, as House Republicans try to reach this compromise on cutting spending, but also maybe restoring some tax credits for people who pay higher property taxes. To what extent do we think this was coming up in Florida and potentially muddies their ability to reach some kind of a compromise?
I'm sure it was coming up in Florida, and it came up last week. We saw one of the most vocal proponents of sort of making SALT more generous again, Representative Lawler. He visited the White House last week. The thing you have to remember is the margins among the House Republicans are so slim that if they're going to do something like a tax bill, they can't afford to have sort of 5 to 10 members from high-cost states like California, New Jersey, New York, where this is an issue. They can't afford to have those people not support the bill. And so they're going to have to, make amends and sort of compromise with them. And this is just one of the opening salvos that they have to deal with the tax bill, sort of how much can people deduct from their state and local taxes. And again, this is an issue in these high-cost states where many donors live. Over
in the Senate, throughout the rest of this week, there's going to be a lot of focus on some key confirmation hearings for top Trump choices. Julie Grace, there's apparently still big doubts about Tulsi Gabbard's chances. What have you heard?
Absolutely. I mean, we heard Susan Collins come out this week, and she has a lot of concerns about whether she's actually changed her position on FISA. There are a lot of concerns. I've spoken with Republicans about her past kind of relationship and positive comments about Assad. And I think those are all things that we're kind of going to hear emerge in recent days. And at the House Intel Committee, she can't lose any Republican votes. So she's really going to have to sway some minds with some critics on that panel. So I think of all the nominees right now, she might have the toughest climb of actually being confirmed.
Well, if not her, it's Robert F. Kennedy, who today drew some incredibly direct, outspoken criticism from his cousin, Caroline Kennedy, who spoke out in this video that emerged on social media. Take a look.
Overseeing the FDA, the NIH, the CDC, and Centers for Medicare Services, agencies that are charged with protecting the most vulnerable among us, is an enormous responsibility, and one that Bobby is unqualified to fill. I've known Bobby my whole life. We grew up together. It's no surprise that he keeps birds of prey as pets, because Bobby himself is a predator.
And she goes into great detail in this letter that she sent to members of the House or the Senate Finance and Health Committees about, things that he did back in the day when he was younger. Literally, she claims, grinding up baby chickens and whatnot to feed to his hawks, encouraging substance abuse by his younger siblings, and of course, he's overcome his own. We had not heard from her throughout all this. Now she's speaking out. How does that potentially affect his ability to not only win enough Republican support, but maybe even a handful of Democrats who were thinking about doing it?
Well, I think it's just another hurdle for him. I mean, I think he has several hurdles. His stance on the polio vaccine, his stance on vaccines in general, his past comments on abortion. I know there are some anti-abortion activists who have been trying to block his nomination.
Yeah.
So I think that he has, a lot of problems potentially with his confirmation. And this is just the latest. And it's, very personal comments that she's making. About a family member, and I think it will definitely catch the heads, maybe not of Republicans, but certainly of Democrats.
I mean, even suggesting that her father and his father would have been ashamed of what he's been doing. It's a pretty incredible letter. You should check it out if you're interested. Nancy Cook, Julie Grace Brufke, thank you both for being here. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks.
President Trump's sweeping immigration crackdown is also targeting legal ways to enter the United States. Next, we'll speak with Congressman Gabe Vasquez of New Mexico, who's got concerns about that. You're watching America Decides. As we told you at the top of the hour, Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem joined ICE agents for an immigration raid in the streets of New York this morning. At least 4 people connected to criminal activity were taken into custody. But the new Trump administration is moving beyond those entering the country illegally or accused of crimes. Earlier, we spoke with New Mexico Democratic Congressman Gabe Vasquez about that. And we should also note we spoke to him prior to a federal judge temporarily halting the president's funding freeze. Congressman, thank you for joining us. I wanted to start with your reaction to the sight of Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem in the streets of New York today And the general openness that the Trump administration has had with these ongoing ICE, DEA, and other federal agency missions to root out and arrest immigrants across the country?
Well, I think it's a very haphazard approach to an issue that I think many Americans agree that we need to deal with. But when we talk about rooting out some of the violent criminals that are on our streets, it really has to be a targeted and a strategic approach. And the resources from our federal law enforcement agencies that are tasked with carrying out this task that I've talked to would agree with this. There needs to be time to be able to vet who some of these violent criminals are, be able to apprehend them, and keep folks out of the crossfire. And so what I'm seeing from this scattershot approach from this administration is that they're more interested in this reality TV game of mass deportation rather than actually coming through with a strategic plan to root out some of the criminals that are on our streets.
When you say targeted and strategic approach, you mean find those that may have committed crimes or are national security risks. Don't grab people who may just be here in an undocumented way?
That's exactly right. And look, I represent a border district, and we are used to working with Customs and Border Protection, with Border Patrol and ICE. And we know what these targeted operations look like here in New Mexico, especially when you're going after violent criminals, members of cartels, human traffickers. The truth is that these investigations take quite a bit of time, and they have to be done and carried out in a way that doesn't put American citizens in the crossfire. For example, from what we've seen here at the Mescalero Apache Reservation on the Navajo Nation, this doesn't seem to have really rhyme or reason. And I expect better from this administration to carry out on their promises to do what they said they're going to do.
You're saying you know of American citizens who've been arrested by ICE or other agencies as part of these raids?
Well, they've been detained and questioned by ICE. And what that does is simply it causes fear and confusion in communities. It makes communities less safe. In my district, we have a deep history of immigration and immigrant labor. And so being able to tell who is a violent criminal and who isn't really comes down to profiling. And when we are looking at these non-targeted enforcement activities, American citizens are already being caught up in these lines of questioning and these very unstrategic operations. And I think we're going to expect to see more of that based on this very unorganized approach to what's happening.
What do you make of the administration's attempts to restrict legal immigration, including from those who may be coming from countries fleeing violence?
Well, look, that's a conversation that I believe we need to have collectively with members of Congress. We've been working on all kinds of different immigration-related legislation, including my two bills, the Stop Fentanyl at the Border Act and the Humane Accountability Act, which were both bipartisan and which I hope will get a hearing in Congress. That's really important that the proposals that have been put forth, including the Senate Republican proposal before Trump took office that actually had a chance at passing Congress when it comes to comprehensive immigration changes in this country, we really need to look at those opportunities for us to work together, and that this is not a unilateral approach. Look, one of the reasons I'm here in Congress is to represent my district, and that includes both farm workers and farmers. That includes small business owners. That includes dreamers. That includes the folks who are putting food on our table every day across this country. And so we need to have a conversation about how we do this legislatively, and Republicans and Democrats need to work together, and I'm prepared to do that, both to pass my bills and work on every aspect of how immigration can actually help support and bolster our economy and keep violent criminals out.
As if that wasn't causing enough confusion and concern across the country, there is also this memo the president issued that is tying up what the Trump administration says is at least $3 trillion in federal spending. It's caused a lot of confusion today about whether certain federal aid is going to reach people. What has been the incoming to your office from constituents who are hearing about this and may be concerned whether money will be there for them?
It's complete chaos. Right now on the ground, we are getting calls from seniors asking about their benefits. Will they receive them on time? I just visited a youth enrichment project here in Zuni Pueblo, one of the farthest reaches of my district, who are about to lose 67% of their federal funding, that are in danger of letting go 7 people who actually help support young people. And we're getting questions from parents about their ability to feed their kids, or even if their after-school programs are still going to be in operation. This has caused nothing but chaos. The administration, again, did not take or do their due diligence in this executive order, and that is, I believe, maladministration on the part of this Trump administration.
So that quickly today, you were hearing from parents and from nonprofits in your district saying, we're confused about this and we're concerned. That's incredible. Look, host of things he's done in the last week or so, fulfilling pledges to really disrupt the way the federal government runs, the way Washington operates. How is your party, the Democratic Party, supposed to be responding to this? There were press conferences, for example, today in Washington scheduled to talk about the pardons of the January 6th defendants that turned into more urgent conversations about what we were just discussing, that budget memo that tied up all this funding. I mean, things are moving so fast, it's got to be really difficult for your party to respond to this. How should they?
Well, look, I think this is part of the administration's strategy, is to bombard us with executive actions.
Sure. So then what's your party's strategy to respond to it all?
Well, look, I can speak for my district, and the way that we're responding to it is, one, taking calls from constituents in our districts who are concerned with some of these changes, whether it's immigration law or the impoundment of federal funds that we saw today that help serve seniors and veterans and young people, access to food assistance. Democrats should be focused on their districts and what they can do to respond to these executive orders. Now, at the larger level, look, we need leadership. We need to be able to push back on this administration in a forceful and an aggressive way, especially as we see that these unilateral actions by the president are having real impacts for families, and they're not making our quality of life any better. So we need strong leadership, and we need strong messaging out of the Democratic Party.
Well, who do you think then is the leader of the Democratic Party right now?
Well, look, I can't comment on that. That's probably above my pay grade. What I can tell you is that the Democratic caucus is united in trying to find solutions, both to respond to the executive actions that the administration has taken. But look, we're in week 2 of this administration. This is going to be a marathon of things that we have to respond to. And I believe one of the things that the American people should know is that we are truly interested in the health and well-being of all Americans, that we want to make sure we're fixing roads and fixing bridges, that we are helping reduce the cost of medications for seniors, that we are preserving Social Security, and that we're stopping some of these tyrannical actions from this administration. I think that needs to be the message, and I think the party needs to carry that into their home districts more than anything.
Well, as the marathon continues, hopefully you'll come back to talk to us, whether here in Washington or there in your district. I know it's a district work week, so we appreciate you taking some time. Congressman Gabe Vasquez of the great state of New Mexico, thank you.
Thank you, Ed.
Could former Transportation Secretary, presidential hopeful, and Indiana Mayor Pete Buttigieg be eyeing a possible Senate run in Michigan? That's next. Stay with us. You're watching America Decides.
I haven't made any decisions about my future, except that I'm going to be spending a lot more time with Chasten and the kids. There's lots of possibilities. People have lots of ideas.
That was former Mayor of South Bend, Indiana, presidential hopeful and Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg last month, who says he's taking a serious look now at running for the United States Senate in his new home state of Michigan. Buttigieg is, quote, exploring all his options, according to a source close to him. A seat opened up today in the battleground state after Democratic Senator Gary Peters announced he wouldn't seek re-election in 2026. Now, as we tick closer to the end of our broadcast tonight, the hands of another clock are moving ominously closer to the end. The doomsday clock has now been set at 89 seconds to midnight. It's also known as the end of the world. That's a second closer than we were in 2024 to global catastrophe. The University of Chicago-based nonprofit, the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, uses the clock as a metaphor to show how issues like global warming and nuclear weapons could end life as we know it. We should note, it is possible for that clock to move backwards, further away from the end of the world. Better luck next year. On that note, that does it for today. We're a step closer to another edition of the Daily Report, but this has been America Decides. Join us at 5 p.m. Eastern tomorrow. The Daily Report starts now.